The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction, its walls made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated sections, their bodies ranging from towering insectoid forms to small furry creatures that barely reached 3 feet tall. The air itself hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert thousands of languages into something each species could understand. High Arbiter Zelthos rose from his throne at the center of the chamber, his forearms spread wide in the traditional gesture of authority. His gray skin shimmered under the lights as he looked out at the assembled delegates with cold satisfaction. This was a moment he had waited for since humanity first stumbled into known space nearly a century ago. "The Council has reached a decision," he announced, his deep voice carrying through the massive hall. "After careful consideration of all evidence presented, we find the species known as humans guilty of the following crimes against galactic order." He paused for effect, watching the screens around the chamber display images of human ships, human colonies, and human soldiers. First, unauthorized expansion into protected sectors. Second, refusal to submit to Council inspection of military facilities. Third, development of weapons technology that violates 17 different treaties. And fourth, continued resistance to cultural integration programs designed to civilize their primitive society. Murmurs spread through the chamber as delegates whispered to each other. The Krethians clicked their mandibles in approval, while the Velthari admirals nodded with grim satisfaction. Only a few species, the younger ones who had joined the Council more recently, seemed uncertain. "Therefore," Zelthos continued, his voice rising, "the Galactic Council hereby declares total war upon humanity. All human vessels are to be destroyed on sight. All human colonies are to be occupied and their populations relocated to designated containment zones. The human homeworld, Earth, is to be blockaded until unconditional surrender is achieved." He slammed his staff against the floor, the sound echoing like thunder. "Let this serve as a lesson to any species that believes it can challenge Council authority." The vote was unanimous. The war begins immediately. Across the galaxy, on a small blue planet that the Council had always dismissed as insignificant, Admiral Kate Morrison stood in the war room of the United Nations Space Command headquarters. She was 62 years old, her silver hair cut short in a practical military style, her uniform decorated with medals from conflicts that officially never happened. Around her stood the joint chiefs of every major nation on Earth, their faces tense as they watched the live transmission from the Council chamber. Commander Danny Liu, her aide of 15 years, stood at her right side. He was a calm and steady presence, a man who had proven himself in dozens of classified operations. To her left stood General Victor Reyes, commander of ground forces, his scarred face unreadable as always. The transmission ended with Zelthos raising his staff in triumph, and the war room fell into heavy silence. "Admiral," Danny said quietly, "what are your orders?" Kate Morrison did not answer immediately. Instead, she walked slowly to the main display screen, her boots clicking against the polished floor. She looked at the map of known space, at the red markers showing Council fleet positions, at the blue dots representing humanity's official and very small defense force. Then she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a chess player who had just watched her opponent walk into a trap 60 years in the making. "Finally," she said, and the word carried a weight that made everyone in the room straighten their spines. She turned to face her command staff, and her eyes were sharp as steel. "Ladies and gentlemen, today marks the end of the longest and most successful deception in human history. For 60 years, we have played the role of the weak and primitive species. We have let the Council's observers see only what we wanted them to see. We have hidden our true capabilities in places they never thought to look." She pressed a button on the console, and the display changed. Instead of the small fleet the Council knew about, Thousands of green markers appeared throughout the solar system. Hidden bases in the asteroid belt, secret shipyards beneath the surfaces of moons, weapons platforms disguised as mining operations. "Activate Protocol Prometheus," she ordered. "All reserve fleets are to launch immediately. All planetary defense systems are to go to full readiness. And send a message to our friends in the outer colonies." General Reyes stepped forward. "Admiral, the Council fleet is already mobilizing. Our intelligence suggests they will reach Sol System within 72 hours. "I know," Kate replied calmly. "I am counting on it." Danny looked at her with a mixture of awe and concern. "You really have been planning for this." Kate walked to the window and looked out at the night sky. Somewhere out there, the largest military force in galactic history was preparing to crush humanity. They expected fear, panic, desperate negotiations. They had no idea what was coming. "My grandmother was on the first contact team," she said quietly. "She was 23 years old, full of hope and wonder. She believed we were about to join a community of enlightened species. Instead, she watched them laugh at us. She heard them call us animals, primitives, a species too violent and dangerous to ever be trusted." She turned back to her officers. "They drew a border around our solar system and told us we could never leave. They stationed observers on our planet to make sure we stayed obedient, and they told us to be grateful that they were letting us live at all." Her hands clenched into fists. "My grandmother came home from that meeting and started planning. She recruited others who understood what we were facing. They created the first hidden research facilities, the first secret training programs, and when she died, 30 years ago, she passed that mission to me." She walked back to the command console and began entering authorization codes. Every president, every prime minister, every leader of every nation on Earth has known about this. For the first time in our history, humanity has been truly united in a single purpose, to prepare for this day. Deep beneath the lunar surface, massive doors that had remained sealed for decades began to grind open. Lights flickered on in vast hangars where ships of war had waited patiently in the darkness. Crews who had trained in secret for their entire careers rushed to their stations with disciplined precision. On Mars, underground cities that the Council never detected came alive with activity. Soldiers checked their weapons and said goodbye to their families. Engineers ran final diagnostics on systems designed to counter every known Council technology. In the asteroid belt, mining vessels dropped their disguises and revealed themselves as heavily armed warships. Commanders who had pretended to be simple miners for years finally spoke their true ranks over secure channels. And in orbit around Earth, satellites that the Council had dismissed as primitive communication relays began transmitting encrypted signals across the solar system, coordinating the largest military mobilization in human history. Admiral Kate Morrison watched the displays light up with activity, watched 60 years of preparation finally spring into action. "They wanted a war," she said to her officers. "They are going to get one, but it will not be the war they expected." She sat down in her command chair and began issuing orders. The first phase of humanity's response was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Kethros of the Valthari Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the stars streak past as his fleet traveled through hyperspace. He was a veteran of 14 campaigns, a decorated warrior who had crushed rebellions on dozens of worlds, and he had never known defeat. 300 warships followed behind him, each one carrying enough firepower to level a continent. This was the Council's forward fleet, the tip of the spear, sent to break human resistance before the main force even arrived. Kethros expected the mission to take perhaps a week, maybe 2, if the humans were foolish enough to fight. "Admiral," his sensor officer called out, "we will exit hyperspace in 5 minutes." Kethros nodded slowly. "Good. Signal all ships to take standard attack formation. I want weapons hot the moment we arrive." Around him, His crew moved with practiced efficiency. They were professionals, the best the Velthari had to offer, and they had absolute confidence in their superiority. After all, the Council had defeated every species that had ever challenged them. Why would these primitive humans be any different? The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. The stars held steady, the sensors showed no immediate threats, and the distant sun burned with quiet indifference. "Report," Kethros demanded. "Scanning the system now, Admiral. I am detecting the human defense fleet holding position near their fourth planet." Kethros allowed himself a thin smile. "How many ships?" "Approximately 50 vessels, Admiral. Mostly light cruisers and patrol craft, nothing that could threaten us." "Just as intelligence predicted," Kethros said with satisfaction. "They have nothing. All ships, advance in formation. We will crush their little fleet and then move on to their homeworld." The Velthari fleet began its approach, moving in the standard Council attack pattern that had worked so well for thousands of years. Large battleships in the center, cruisers on the flanks, destroyers screening for any surprise attacks. It was a formation designed to overwhelm any enemy through sheer firepower. What Kethros did not know, what his sensors could not detect, was that thousands of devices were hidden throughout the approach corridor. They were small, barely larger than a human fist, coated in materials that absorbed every form of radiation the Council knew how to detect. They had been placed there over the course of decades, one, by ships disguised as comets and asteroids. Lieutenant Commander Sam Ortega sat in the weapons bay of the carrier Defiance, watching the enemy fleet appear on his tactical display. He was 28 years old, born on a mining colony in the asteroid belt, and he had spent his entire adult life training for this moment. His hands were steady on the controls, his breathing was calm and measured. Beside him, his weapons team monitored their systems with quiet intensity. "Enemy fleet entering the outer marker," the sensor operator reported. Admiral Morrison's voice came through the fleet-wide channel, clear and confident. "All ships, hold your positions. Do not engage until my command. Let them come to us." Sam watched the red markers advance across his display. 300 enemy warships, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything humanity had officially built. Any reasonable observer would say the human fleet had no chance. But Sam knew better. He had seen the weapons tests. He had watched railgun rounds, traveling at 1/10 the speed of light, punch through simulated Council shields like they were made of paper. He had trained in the neural link systems that would let the human fleet fight as a single coordinated organism. The Velthari fleet passed the first hidden marker, then the second. They were deep in the trap now, surrounded by weapons they could not see. On the bridge of the Dominion, Kethros frowned at his display. "Why are they not moving? Why are they just sitting there?" "Perhaps they are hoping to negotiate, Admiral," his second officer suggested. "Fools," Kethros snorted. "All ships, increase speed. Let us end this quickly." The fleet pushed forward, eager for battle, completely unaware of the death that surrounded them. Admiral Morrison watched the enemy markers reach the designated coordinates and smiled. "Now," she said simply. Across the solar system, thousands of devices activated simultaneously. Gravitational disruptors created pockets of distorted space that threw enemy ships wildly off course. Stealth mines detonated in precise patterns, targeting engines and shield generators. Railgun platforms, hidden among the asteroids, opened fire with devastating accuracy. The Velthari formation shattered in seconds. Ships that had been flying in perfect order suddenly found themselves tumbling through space, their navigation systems screaming warnings they had never been programmed to handle. Explosions bloomed across the fleet as mines found their targets. "What is happening?" Kethros roared as his flagship lurched violently. "Report!" "We are under attack from all directions, Admiral. I cannot identify the weapon systems. Our shields are failing." Sam Ortega watched his display light up with hits. "First wave complete," he reported. Enemy formation is broken. They are scattering. All ships engage, Morrison ordered. Show them what humanity can do. The human fleet surged forward, no longer hiding, no longer pretending to be weak. Carriers launched swarms of fighters that moved with impossible coordination. Their pilots linked through neural networks that let them share information instantaneously. Destroyers fired railgun salvos that crossed the battlefield in heartbeats. Cruisers targeted enemy command ships with weapons that bypassed shields entirely. Kethros watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart. Ships he had served with for decades vanished in balls of fire. Distress calls flooded his communications channels. His proud armada was being slaughtered. "Fall back," he screamed. "All ships retreat to hyperspace." But the gravitational disruptors made hyperspace entry impossible. The Velthari ships were trapped, caught in a killing ground of humanity's design. The battle lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, 263 Council warships had been destroyed. 37 had surrendered. Not a single human vessel was lost. Sam Ortega leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. Around him, his crew was cheering, embracing each other, crying with relief and triumph. They had done it. They had actually done it. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Linda Hayes watched the last enemy ship lower its weapons and broadcast a surrender signal. She was 45 years old, a career officer who had spent 20 years commanding ships that officially did not exist. And she had never felt prouder than she did at this moment. "Admiral," she reported, "enemy fleet is neutralized. We are receiving multiple surrender signals." Morrison's voice came back, calm as always. "Acknowledged, Captain. Dispatch medical teams to enemy vessels. Treat their wounded as we would treat our own. Take prisoners with dignity and respect." Hayes nodded, unsurprised by the order. This was what made humanity different. They could be fierce in battle, but they did not become monsters. Across the galaxy, other species watched recordings of the battle in stunned silence. The footage spread like wildfire through unofficial channels, showing the mighty Council fleet being destroyed by a species they had all been taught to look down upon. On a dozen worlds, beings who had suffered under Council rule for generations felt something they had not felt in centuries: hope. And in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, High Arbiter Zelphos stared at the casualty reports with trembling hands. His forward fleet, the pride of the Velthari Empire, had been annihilated. The humans had not just won. They had made it look easy. "How?" he whispered. "How is this possible?" No one had an answer, but deep in their hearts, the Council leaders were beginning to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. 3 days after the battle, Admiral Kate Morrison sat in her private quarters aboard the command station orbiting Earth. The room was simple, almost austere, with few decorations, except for a single photograph on her desk showing a young woman in a diplomatic uniform smiling at the camera. That woman was her grandmother, Helen Morrison, taken on the day she left for the first contact mission. Dr. Amy Reeves sat across from her, a tablet in her hands, displaying intercepted Council communications. Amy was humanity's chief expert on alien cultures, a brilliant xenoanthropologist who had spent her career studying species that did not know they were being studied. "They still do not understand," Amy said, scrolling through the reports. "The Council leadership believes the Battle of Jupiter was a fluke. They think we somehow got lucky, that we cannot possibly have more surprises waiting." Kate smiled without humor. "What are they planning? They are sending the combined fleet. Every warship they can spare from every member species. Preliminary estimates suggest over 2,000 vessels." "Good," Kate said quietly. "Let them commit everything." Amy looked up from her tablet. "Admiral, may I ask you something personal?" Kate nodded. "How long have you known this day would come? How long have you been preparing?" Kate was silent for a moment, her eyes drifting to the photograph on her desk. When she spoke, Her voice carried the weight of decades. My grandmother was 23 years old when she joined the first contact team. She was a junior diplomat, full of dreams about humanity joining a community of peaceful species. She had studied languages her entire life, hoping to one day speak with beings from other worlds. Kate stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. The council welcomed our delegation with what we thought was open arms. They showed us wonders beyond our imagination, technologies that seemed like magic, civilizations that had existed for millions of years, and my grandmother believed, truly believed, that we were about to enter a golden age. Her hands tightened on the window frame. Then they showed us the treaty. It declared humanity a Class 7 species, the lowest classification in their system. It restricted us to our home system permanently. It required us to submit to council observers who would monitor our development and ensure we never became a threat. And it made clear that any violation would be met with immediate and overwhelming force. "What did the delegation do?" Amy asked softly. They argued. They pleaded. They tried to negotiate, and the council laughed at them. The Velthari admiral called us clever animals playing at civilization. The Krethian delegates suggested we should be grateful they were not simply sterilizing our planet, and the High Arbiter told my grandmother, to her face, that humanity would never amount to anything. Kate turned back to face Amy. My grandmother came home from that meeting a changed woman. The idealist who had left Earth never returned. In her place was someone who understood exactly what we were facing. She returned to her desk and activated a hidden panel, revealing a wall of files and documents that stretched back decades. She started the first cell within a month. 12 people, all of them diplomats and scientists, who had witnessed the council's contempt firsthand. They called themselves the Prometheus Group, named after the Titan who brought fire to humanity against the will of the gods. I have heard rumors of Prometheus, but I always thought it was a myth. That was intentional, Kate replied. Prometheus operated in absolute secrecy. They recruited slowly and carefully, bringing in only those who could be trusted completely. They established hidden research facilities, secret training programs, and most importantly, they developed the technology we would need to fight back. She pulled out a thick folder marked with classification stamps that Amy had never seen before. Within 10 years, Prometheus had cells in every major government on Earth. Within 20 years, they had built the first hidden shipyard. Within 30 years, they had developed weapons that surpassed council technology in every meaningful way. And no one ever discovered them? Amy asked in disbelief. Kate shook her head. The council's observers were arrogant. They believed we were incapable of deceiving them. They watched our official military and laughed at our primitive weapons. They monitored our public research and mocked our slow progress. They never thought to look deeper. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. Meanwhile, beneath the lunar surface, we were building dreadnoughts. In the asteroid belt, we were mining resources and constructing weapons platforms. On Mars, we were training soldiers in facilities that did not officially exist. And through it all, we smiled at the council's observers and pretended to be the simple primitives they expected us to be. A notification chimed on Kate's console. She glanced at it, and her expression darkened. Speaking of our preparations, I need to show you something. She led Amy through a series of secure corridors to a command center deep within the station. Inside, dozens of analysts monitored screens showing data from across the galaxy. This is Section 7, Kate explained, our intelligence division. For the past 40 years, we have been placing agents throughout Council space. Amy stared at the displays in amazement. They showed detailed information about Council fleet movements, supply lines, defense networks, and political divisions. Information that should have been impossible for humanity to obtain. How? She breathed. Patience, Kate replied. Some of our agents have been in place for decades. They started as low-level workers, cleaners and cargo handlers and maintenance technicians. They learned the languages, adapted to the cultures, and slowly worked their way into positions of trust. Now they are everywhere. She pointed to one screen showing a complex diagram. The Council's main defense grid has 17 vulnerabilities that we created. Their supply lines pass through systems where our people control key facilities. Their communication networks have back doors that we installed 20 years ago and they have never discovered. Amy shook her head slowly. This is incredible. All of this, hidden for so long. 60 years, Kate confirmed. 60 years of playing weak while building strength. 60 years of smiling at those who called us animals while preparing to show them exactly what humans can do. A senior analyst approached. Admiral, the combined fleet has finished assembling. They are preparing to move towards Sol system. Kate nodded. Good. Activate our assets in their supply chain. Nothing dramatic, just enough to slow them down and create confusion. She turned back to Amy. The Council thinks this war will be a simple matter of overwhelming force. They have more ships, more resources, more experience. By every measure they know, they should win easily. Her smile was cold and satisfied. But they are fighting blind. Their intelligence is compromised. Their logistics are sabotaged. And their enemy knows more about them than they know about themselves. They declared war on humanity because they thought we were weak. She looked out at the stars, at the galaxy that had tried to keep humanity caged. They are about to learn how wrong they were. The combined fleet of the Galactic Council dropped out of hyperspace in a display of power meant to terrify. 2,000 warships from 16 different species, representing the greatest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Battleships the size of small moons, cruisers bristling with weapons, carriers launching swarms of fighters that darkened the stars. Supreme Commander Vorteth of the Krethian Empire surveyed the formation from his command throne. He was ancient by his species' standards. A warrior who had been fighting before humanity's ancestors climbed down from the trees. He had crushed rebellions that lasted centuries, broken species that thought themselves invincible, and he had never once retreated from battle. Report, he clicked, his mandibles clacking with authority. All ships in position, Supreme Commander. We are detecting the human fleet near their third planet. How many vessels? Approximately 100, Commander. They appear to be forming a defensive line. Vorteth made a sound that was his species' equivalent of laughter. 100 ships against 2,000. They truly are insane. He rose from his throne and addressed the combined fleet through the communication network. All commanders hear me. We are not here merely to defeat the humans. We are here to make an example of them. Destroy their fleet, bombard their colonies, and do not stop until they beg for mercy. The fleet began its advance, confident in its overwhelming superiority. After all, how could 100 ships possibly stand against 2,000? But as they moved deeper into the solar system, things began to go wrong. First, several supply ships reported engine failures. Then, communication relays started malfunctioning. Then, navigation data became increasingly unreliable. What is happening? Vorteth demanded. Unknown, Commander. Our systems are experiencing multiple failures. It must be some kind of interference. Vorteth's eyes narrowed. Or sabotage. Continue the advance. We will crush them regardless of these minor inconveniences. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge of the destroyer Relentless, watching the enemy fleet approach on her tactical display. She was 41 years old, the daughter of teachers from San Juan, and she had spent 15 years commanding ships in the secret fleet. Today, for the first time, she would command one in open battle. All stations report ready, her first officer announced. Maria nodded. Neural links active? All crew connected. We are synced with the fleet network. Maria closed her eyes for a moment and felt the connection. Through the neural link, she could sense the other ships in the human fleet. Not just their positions, but their readiness, their confidence, their determination. 300 vessels, thinking and fighting as one. Admiral Morrison's voice came through the network, not just as sound, but as a presence they could all feel. All ships, the enemy is committed. They have no escape. Today, we show the galaxy what humanity can do. And then, from across the solar system, more ships began to appear. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands. Hidden docks opened on moons throughout the system, revealing fleets that had been waiting in darkness for decades. Asteroid bases launched wings of fighters. Weapons platforms that had been disguised as debris powered up and locked onto targets. The combined fleet suddenly found itself surrounded. Vortev stared at his displays in disbelief. Impossible. Where did they all come from? Unknown, Commander. We are detecting over 3,000 enemy vessels. Our fleet is being flanked on all sides. Fight! Vortev roared. All ships, open fire. The battle began with a fury that shook the heavens. Energy beams and missiles crossed the void in every direction. Ships maneuvered desperately, trying to find angles of attack. Explosions bloomed across the darkness like deadly flowers. But from the start, it was clear that something was wrong. Council ships fired at targets that were no longer there, their weapons guided by sensors that had been quietly corrupted. Meanwhile, human weapons struck with impossible precision, hitting weak points that should have been secret. Maria guided the relentless through the chaos with smooth confidence. Her neural link let her see through the eyes of her crew, feel the ship's systems as if they were extensions of her own body. She knew where enemies would be before they arrived, anticipated their maneuvers before they made them. Railgun battery, fire, she ordered, and 3 council cruisers vanished in flashes of superheated metal. Around her, the human fleet moved like a single organism. Where council ships fought as individuals, confused and uncoordinated, human vessels supported each other with perfect timing. When one ship was threatened, others moved to protect it. When an opportunity appeared, multiple ships exploited it simultaneously. Sergeant Lucy Chen led her Marine squad through the corridors of a crippled council battleship. They had boarded through a breach in the hull, moving with careful precision through the alien architecture. Lucy was 25, young for a squad leader, but she had trained for boarding actions since she was 18. Contact ahead, her point man whispered through the comm. Lucy signaled her squad to halt. Through the smoke and flickering lights, she could see Velthari soldiers forming a defensive line. They were wounded, frightened, but still ready to fight. Lucy made a decision. She stepped out from cover, her weapon lowered. "We are not here to kill you," she called out in the Velthari language she had spent years learning. "Your ship is lost, your fleet is being destroyed. But you do not have to die today. Surrender, and you will be treated with honor." The Velthari soldiers stared at her in confusion. This was not how enemies behaved. This was not how the galaxy worked. Their leader, an older officer with burns across half his face, slowly lowered his weapon. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you show mercy? We came to destroy your world." Lucy met his eyes. "Because killing you would not make us safer. It would only make us monsters. We are fighting for survival, not for revenge." One by one, the Velthari soldiers lowered their weapons. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out on dozens of ships. Human Marines boarded crippled vessels and offered surrender terms. Medic ships moved through the wreckage, rescuing survivors regardless of species. Communications officers broadcast calls for surrender in every language they knew. Supreme Commander Vortev watched his fleet disintegrate around him. 1,400 ships destroyed, hundreds more crippled or captured. His own flagship was heavily damaged, its weapons offline, its engines failing. A human voice came through his communication system. "Supreme Commander, This is Admiral Kate Morrison of the United Nations Space Command. Your fleet is defeated. Further resistance will only lead to more deaths. I am offering you the chance to surrender with honor. Vorteth slumped in his command throne. In all his centuries of war, he had never experienced anything like this. He had been outmaneuvered, outfought, and now he was being offered mercy by an enemy he had expected to crush. Why? He asked, echoing the question his soldiers had asked across 100 boarded ships. Why do you not simply destroy us? Morrison's voice was calm, but warm. Because we are not what you thought we were. We never were. Surrender your fleet, Commander. Let us end this battle before more lives are lost. Vorteth closed his ancient eyes and spoke the words he had never expected to say. All ships, stand down. We surrender. And across the solar system, the guns fell silent. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated sections, but there was no whispering, no murmuring, no clicking of mandibles or rustling of wings. Every being in the room was frozen, watching the human delegation walk down the central aisle. Admiral Kate Morrison led the way, her silver hair catching the light from the crystalline walls. She was flanked by Commander Danny Liu and General Victor Reyes, their uniforms crisp and their expressions calm. Behind them came Dr. Amy Reeves and a dozen other advisors, each one representing a different aspect of human civilization. In orbit above the Council homeworld, 500 human warships held position. Their weapons were silent, but their presence was a reminder of what humanity could do if provoked. The mighty Galactic Council, which had ruled the galaxy for millennia, was now at the mercy of a species they had dismissed as primitives. High Arbiter Zelthos sat on his crystalline throne, but he no longer looked like a ruler. His gray skin had gone pale, his forearms hung limply at his sides, and his eyes were fixed on the approaching humans with undisguised fear. Kate stopped before the central platform and looked up at the assembled representatives. She took her time, letting the silence stretch, letting them wonder what fate awaited them. You declared war on humanity, she finally said, her voice carrying through the vast hall without amplification. You sent your fleets to destroy us. You planned to bombard our colonies, relocate our population to camps, and reduce our homeworld to rubble. She paused, letting her words sink in. You expected to crush us in weeks. Instead, your forward fleet was annihilated in 47 minutes. Your combined fleet, the greatest armada in galactic history, was defeated in a single battle. Your military power is broken, your secrets are exposed, and the path to every council world lies open before us. Zelthos flinched as if struck. Around the chamber, delegates shifted uneasily. So now, Kate continued, we must decide what happens next. We must determine the fate of species that tried to exterminate us, of governments that called us animals, of a council that kept us caged for a century. She reached into her uniform and pulled out a small data chip. Every eye in the chamber followed it as she held it up. This contains our terms. Would you like to hear them? Zelthos nodded weakly, unable to speak. Kate smiled, and it was not the cold smile of a conqueror. It was something warmer, something that confused every being watching. We demand nothing. The chamber erupted in confused noise. Delegates looked at each other in disbelief. Surely they had misheard. Kate raised her hand, and the noise subsided. We are not here to conquer. We are not here to enslave. We are not here to take revenge. We are here to offer you something you never offered us. A choice. She turned slowly, addressing the entire chamber. For 60 years, we prepared for war. We built weapons and trained soldiers, and planned for the day when we would have to fight for our survival. But we never wanted war. We wanted to explore, to learn, to grow alongside other species. You denied us that chance. You locked us in a cage and told us to be grateful." Her voice softened, but carried no less weight. "So we prepared in secret, not to dominate the galaxy, but to ensure that when this day came, we would be strong enough to be free. And now we are free. Now we can choose our own path. And we choose to offer you a new beginning." She activated the data chip, and screens throughout the chamber displayed the human proposal. There will be no council authority over any species. The old system is dead. Every world will govern itself, make its own choices, determine its own future. Trade will be free and open, based on mutual benefit rather than imposed quotas. And any species that wishes to oppress another will face humanity's opposition. A Crethian delegate rose from his seat. "You are dismantling everything we built. The Council has maintained order for millennia." "The Council has maintained control," Kate corrected gently. "There is a difference. You called it order, but it was a system where the strong dominated the weak, where young species were kept in cages, where anyone who challenged your authority was crushed. Is that really worth preserving?" The delegate had no answer. Another representative, a small furry being from a species that had joined the council only a few centuries ago, stood hesitantly. "What do you offer in its place?" Kate turned to him with genuine warmth. "A true alliance, not one based on fear and hierarchy, but on mutual respect and cooperation. Humanity will help any world that asks. We will defend any species threatened with extinction. We will share our technology freely with those who want it." She spread her arms wide. "We are offering friendship, real friendship, between equals. No more masters and subjects, no more classifications and restrictions. Just beings from different worlds working together because they choose to, not because they are forced to." Silence fell over the chamber again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of beings trying to comprehend something they had never imagined. Admiral Kethros, who had been brought to the Council homeworld as a prisoner, but was now seated with the human delegation as a guest, rose to speak. His wounds had healed, and he carried himself with the dignity of a warrior who had learned to respect his former enemies. "I commanded the fleet that first attacked the humans," he said. "I expected to destroy them easily. Instead, they destroyed us. And when my ship was crippled and my crew was wounded, they sent medics to help us. They treated our injuries with the same care they showed their own." He looked at Kate with something like wonder. "I asked them why. Their answer changed everything I believed about war and honor. They said that killing us would not make them safer, only make them monsters. They showed me that strength and mercy can exist together." He turned to address his fellow council members. "I have spent the past weeks learning about humanity. They are not the primitives we thought they were. They are not the animals we called them. They are a species that has been through terrible wars and learned from them, a species that values both strength and compassion." He straightened his shoulders. "I believe their offer is genuine. I recommend we accept it." Slowly, hesitantly, other delegates began to nod. They had seen the recordings of human Marines offering mercy to defeated enemies. They had heard reports of medical ships saving lives regardless of species. They had watched a conqueror offer freedom instead of chains. High Arbiter Zelphos finally found his voice. "And if we refuse, if we reject your offer?" Kate met his eyes. "Then we will leave. We will return to our own space and build our own future. We will not force you to accept our friendship. That would make us no better than you were." She smiled gently. "But I do not think you will refuse. I think you know deep down that the old way was wrong. I think many of you have waited your whole lives for someone to stand up and say that there must be a better way." One by one, the delegates voted to accept humanity's terms. The old council dissolved, and in its place, a new alliance began to form. 1 year later, Kate Morrison stood on the observation deck of a space station built through the cooperation of 12 species. Beside her stood Kethros, now an ambassador dedicated to building bridges between old enemies. "I still do not fully understand you humans," he admitted. Kate laughed softly. "Neither do we, most of the time. But we know one thing. The galaxy is better when we work together than when we fight each other." She looked out at the stars, at ships from a dozen species moving in peaceful commerce, at construction crews building something new. "When you declared war on us," I said finally, "do you know why? Not because I wanted to fight, because I was tired of waiting, tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be less than we are." She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with hope. "Now we do not have to pretend anymore. Now we can show the galaxy who humanity really is. Not the monsters you feared, just people who refuse to give up." The stars stretched out before them, full of possibility, as humanity and its new allies took their first steps into a future they would build together.